much for joining us for our Media Relations Trends webinar brought to you by Pressfeed. And this is Sally Falco. I'm your host and moderator. And I'm delighted to have with us today our guest presenter, Rebecca Lieb, an analyst from the Altimeter Group. Good morning, Rebecca.
Sally, hello, and hello everybody out there on the line. I'm delighted to be here.
Great, so let's get started. We have quite a lot to do today. We're going to talk about the 5 trends that we covered in our Pressfeed white paper. Oh, there you are. I meant to do that. There's Rebecca. Now you know who she is. And yes, you absolutely should get her book because it's terrific. So we're going to talk about these 5 trends that we identified and covered in our white paper. So it's visual storytelling, how to be a resource for the media and why they need that. What is brand journalism and how are companies doing it? What does it do for you? Why you should build up your own distribution network. And then where do you put all this content? So those are the 5 things we're going to cover. So let's just back up a little bit and think about why are we seeing these trends and why do they matter so much now as we go into the new year of 2013. So we obviously have seen some advances in technology, lots of people accessing their news on tablets and mobile phones, and we also on the other hand are seeing that there are still layoffs happening in the newsrooms. The figure I've seen just recently is almost another 2,000 journalists laid off in 2012. As the public, we're now demanding faster access to news. We want to see everything right now, right now. Anything you'd like to contribute, Rebecca, your take on why are we seeing these trends? You've done a lot of research into this year.
Well, one of the things that I think digital communication has enabled is access to multiple news sources, including, and this is really pretty much for the first time in history, primary news sources. So when the public are interested in a news story, they don't necessarily now just read one story in, say, the Washington Post or the New York Times. They'll follow a trail of not only media reports, but very often, if a company is involved, go to that company's website or media center and look at company press releases, which, as we know, are displayed on wire services alongside reported stories. So news has become both broader and deeper in terms of consumption.
Exactly so. Thank you. So here, this was the research that I did just the other day, 1,850 plus jobs layoffs in the newspaper. So that is having an effect on how the media has to respond. They have to do more with less. We also saw this year the Oriella Global Digital Journalism Report, which one of the things they looked at was where does a media outlet have its audience, and as you can see, in North America, about 2/3 of their audience is online. For the rest of the world, it's about half and half, but here in North America, we are definitely tipped in terms of online. So one of the things that all this has brought about is a move to the visual. And I would like Rebecca to tell you about this report and the research that they did and what they discovered in terms of visuals.
Thanks, Sally. In a research report I published with Altimeter Group, my employer, at the beginning of this year, I asked marketers about channel confidence. What content channels did they feel were working and were effective, and what channels they felt were diminishing in importance. And I was very surprised to find that marketers almost overwhelmingly say that their reliance on the written word is decreasing across the board, but at the same time they're exploring new ways to get stories across visually. They're very keen on infographics, they're very keen on video. We've all seen the rise of channels like Pinterest, which has really rocketed into prominence this year. There's certainly a lot of talk about Instagram right now. So visual storytelling, ways to get, you know, that picture is worth 1,000 words, that instantaneous attention is becoming really critical to communications. Sally, I don't know if you put my graphic in that in the PowerPoint which you're running here, but anybody who wants to see a visual plot of this can go to Altimeter's website and download this report. We subscribe to an open research model and don't charge for any of our reports, so I encourage anybody listening to this webinar to grab the research, and if you like it, feel free to share it.
Absolutely, that's one. See if it, you can use it. This is another piece of research that was done by press releases specifically, and they did it a year ago, and at that time they were showing that if you added a text, photos to a text press release, it would that increase and so on up to a maximum of about 80%. But this year they've redone it, and look at the difference now. The increase is actually phenomenal. And when I was speaking at the Media Relations Conference in Washington, D.C. a week ago, I asked that audience how many of them regularly add visuals to their press releases, and it was only about 10% of the room who put their hands up. But when you look at this kind of research and you see the results that you get when you add visuals, I can't imagine why anyone would not want to do this. Rebecca, do you have any data on the same kind of thing happening on news sites? I mean, it just makes sense to me.
You know, as an editor, which is a role that I've held until very, very recently, I ran some major digital news sites, and I can say unequivocally that click-through and viewership of stories that ran with images was exponentially higher than something that ran without an image, to the point where I made it an editorial requirement that all of our feature stories had to be accompanied by an image, whether a product shot or a headshot. It simply captures attention, it draws the eyes to the page, it's an invitation to dive a little bit deeper. And in a world with as many media channels clamoring for attention simultaneously as we have right now, in a multi-channel, multi-device world, an image is the fastest and surest way to capture consumer attention.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I've heard that from other editors on media sites as well, that they're doing the same thing. It is expected, you know, that, as you say, you make the editorial decision that you have to have visuals with the story. And then talking to the journalists and the bloggers who work for the media outlets, that is filtering down to them, where they are being given instructions to make sure that they supply this. So the world is getting a little bit more difficult for people who are reporting the news, because now it's not as simple as just writing a story, getting it in on time, meeting your deadline, that's it. There's a lot more that has to be done. Here's a little bit more, some information about what images can do. And I thought some of these were pretty interesting. The last one, the 63% of people regard the quality of a product's image as more important than the information and even than the reviews. So a lot of companies are concerned about reviews. Well, perhaps if you are, then you should just up the quality of your images. So here's one example of a multimedia press release where there were many images, really good quality images, videos, everything with the code for bloggers and journalists to take and post and make it really easy. Now, you mentioned Pinterest, Rebecca, but we also have Instagram, which has been really growing, and lots of people have been using it. Since it's gone onto Android, it's really also the number of users have increased remarkably. So we are finding that there are people who are using this, but as companies, these are things that you should be including in your planning for next year. Just one thing, these are just some things to think about, that there's something going on with Instagram and Twitter. And so just if you are using those tools, just keep an eye on that. Here are some of the stats that Rebecca was mentioning about Pinterest. And we know that Pinterest is driving a tremendous amount of traffic. So those are the images, and then we get into video. Now, the Web Influencers Survey says that over 80% of media websites now use video, so they're all becoming little TV stations. From your point of view, Rebecca, how important is video?
Video is critically important. Increasingly, the web is a surrogate for, if not in many cases, as cord cutting continues, a substitute for television. Video storytelling is an absolutely fantastic way to communicate information, to educate, to entertain, to show off products, product features. And it's really low-hanging. People have always traditionally, I come from a family of filmmakers. I remember when film and video production were complicated, expensive, and involved major crews and equipment. Now anybody can take a halfway decent video with a camera phone or a smartphone. So we've seen more video every year on the internet, and that's a trend that is only going to continue.
Many PR agencies in maybe the last decade were quite adept at making what we used to call video news releases. But as you say, it was really complicated and very expensive. And it was difficult to get it. You had to have it in broadcast quality. Then you had to upload it to a satellite link or physically take it down to the TV station. And there was no way that you could get it to be used by print or radio. It was only for TV. When you think about being able to translate that into telling stories now in this really easy, simple, quick, inexpensive way that you can get onto all kinds of media websites, it's such a huge opportunity in terms of media relations that I think this, if you do nothing else, this one would be the one to do. And if you don't have...
By the way, in my research, when I asked marketers what the #1 content they were going to up production on, both in this coming year and 5 years out, video was overwhelmingly the top answer.
I'm pleased to hear that. I would just say to you, on your attendees on the webinar, if there isn't anybody in your company or your agency who has these skills, get them trained, or find a partner that you can work with. There are many people out there that can help and do this. And even if you do it in, like, you get trained to do some of it, and then you find someone who can do the editing and work together that way. There are many ways to skin this cat, but it's something you absolutely have to get under your belt. So here are some stats from the 2012 Web Influencer Survey on the percentage of media outlets that will utilize a fully produced outside video. Even the TV stations, 96% of them will take an outside video. On average, it's 80%. And when they were asked for what kind of things they were looking for, The one thing that I thought was very interesting was the use of embed codes. 2 years ago, that didn't show up at all on this survey. Nobody mentioned it. It was still expected that you had to do it in some other difficult way. But now it's more than half of them are already saying, I want the video with an embed code. And if you're talking about web media, it's almost 90%. So if you are providing video in your newsroom, you absolutely have to provide the embed code. At the Media Relations Summit last week, and I was moderating a panel of journalists and bloggers, and I asked them about this. And I said, I've often had a comment from PR people that if the embed code isn't that hard to find, surely the journalist or the blogger could just go and find it themselves. And they all looked at me like this with a kind of blank look on their faces and said, yes, I'm sure we could, but we're not going to. They're under so much pressure that the more that you can help them and just be of service and be a resource to them, the more likely it is they're going to use your material. So that leads us right into becoming how to be a resource for the media. As an editor and running news sites, Rebecca, I'd love if you would talk about that from a point of view if somebody really services you and your journalists and makes life easy for you, as opposed to giving you something you've got to go and track down.
Well, you know, one of the first hurdles to becoming a resource is being available. When media are after a story, it's always on deadline. And deadlines aren't at 3 o'clock or 5 o'clock anymore, particularly in digital journalism. They're immediately. They're 5 minutes ago. So when a query comes in from the media that you are able to take or that your client is able to take, it's key to first and foremost prioritize getting back to them and making yourself available. Secondly, one of the reasons you want to be featured in media is to enhance your reputation as a thought leader or as an influencer. So your job is not just to speak about yourself, your organization, or your company, or whatever it is that you represent or are trying to sell, but the broader industry, broader trends, broader information, inside information that you can share with the media that make them return to you again and again and put you at the tops of their list for ongoing coverage, not just one-off coverage when you get that press release out in a self-interested way and then perhaps have something to share. Grease the skids and make them want to hear from you.
Good point. So this is from Stanford University. They're doing some really interesting work with the media in terms of getting people to collaborate. And I've seen this work really well in many cases, where, as Rebecca was just saying, rather than being totally self-interested, if you can tell a bigger story, if you can get more people involved, if you have other experts or you know of other research, and you can put together a bigger picture package, that would really be helpful. And these guys at Stanford have found that this is working incredibly well. So we have the 15-step guideline on how to do a social media news release, which puts together a lot of these elements. And you can download that at pressfeed.com, press-feed.com. So here's one example from this one from the City Creek Center Mall in Salt Lake City, where every single image, video, everything, the embed code was there, provided, so that they could have a choice. It's better to give more than one image and more than one video, because if you put something out and you send it to the media generally, They know that everybody's getting it, and they don't want to have to publish exactly the same thing that everybody else has. I know that many years ago, Rebecca, you said at one of, I think it was at a Search Engine Strategies conference, once you put something on the wire, you have broken the news.
Yep. You know, you've broken the news as far as the media are concerned, as far as the public are concerned. Out there is out there, and the toothpaste does not go back into the tube.
So one of the ways that might make that easier is if you offer lots of different resources and assets. So they don't think, well, this is the only video, this is the only image, that everyone else is going to be using this, so, you know, I don't really then want to touch it. But if you have enough material, they can craft a story out of it that would be at least their story. So here's one way. This was from the Stanford project. They worked with the PBS station up in Sacramento. The station had done something on the San Joaquin Delta, but it wasn't a very in-depth story. And so Stanford put together a little group of people, institutes, experts, and they created this incredible interactive, you can see it's got 27 or 28 images, and they're interactive maps, and they worked with the journalists. The journalists wrote the story, but the institutes and the experts from the university were providing all the data. So it just ended up being an amazing piece of journalism, which of course they were featured in heavily because they provided all the material. So the next one is brand journalism. Rebecca, do you want to give us your definition of what brand journalism is?
Brand journalism is content creation and dissemination by brands, and there are plenty of brands out there, from consumer products all the way up to, you know, the most obtuse B2B tech companies that are making tremendous strides in publishing and curating and disseminating content for their customers and prospects. Some of them are actually competing head-to-head with, in quotation marks, real publications. American Express is an excellent example with their Open Forum initiative.
And I did see some stats the other day that they've actually had more credit card applications from that source than anywhere else. And yet it's not a sales or advertising medium really at all.
Not at all, other than it looks like a real online publication, and it does in fact have ad units. All the ad units are, of course, for American Express products and services, but not in a particularly ostentatious or outrageous way.
So here are some examples. Coca-Cola just recently relaunched their whole website as a magazine. It's called Coca-Cola Journey. And this was taken from what used to be the internal Coca-Cola magazine. And that was something that companies have done for a very long time. The idea of publishing a magazine for different reasons. I mean, I know hundreds of companies that have done that. And now it's just a question of putting it onto the internet. Red Bull, of course, is a fantastic example, but they've done this kind of content marketing ever since they started. They've had their extreme sports and things like the Red Bulletin. They actually have their own media company now.
Red Bull has actually said it wants to be recognized as much for being a content company as for being a beverage company. And in fact, they produce videos, they have 2 or 3 record labels, innumerable magazines. they pump out as much content as any Hollywood studio record producer or publisher.
Right, they are amazing. Kaiser Health News is a very interesting one. And there's another, just I gave you another one as well from Swedish Hospital. There's a big gap being created in the media because a lot of their medical and health reporters have been laid off. And yet, as the public, we are still demanding as much, if not more, health news. So it has to come from somewhere. Now, Kaiser started Health News, and they hired really good journalists, award-winning journalists. And just like some of the others, this is run like a full-on media company. And they get quoted all the time, their stories in the news. But again, the stories are not only about Kaiser this, Kaiser that. It's genuine health reporting. So that's kind of the trick. I also see big gaps in travel. Travel reporters have been laid off too. So if you can find in your industry a way to do this, there definitely is return on investment. Any other ideas or comments or suggestions on how a company could use brand journalism, Rebecca?
Well, one of the things I think is important to mention in this context is to demonstrate the effectiveness of brand journalism, to apply metrics and KPIs to a publication, and then follow those, refine them, and be able to demonstrate that these brand journalism efforts are paying off. And in order to do that, you have to establish goals. It might be to increase business, to increase loyalty, to increase leads, to build awareness, but have those goals in mind when you launch the program so that the program can serve goals and so that you can measure whether or not you're meeting those goals.
When I was talking to one of the medical hospitals up in Seattle that's been doing this, they started about 6 months ago, and they realized that there was a dearth of content on particular diseases and conditions that they had a lot of expertise in. And so they have been producing content, a lot of video, a lot of interviews with their doctors and their specialists, and because they've had such good results with this and people are finding their content, they're finding that people are coming from all over the country to come to their hospital because they have been doing this brand journalism. So here are just a couple of others. As I said, travel I think is a really good one. Even in financial, you can be doing the same kind of thing. I just heard on the radio driving in here this morning, on NPR, they were talking about to do with buying homes and mortgages and understanding it. And they said the biggest thing that they have identified is that people need education. So right there is an opportunity. If you were in that real estate and mortgage and banking and finance, you could start some kind of an online magazine or site that would talk about just educational articles. So here's the question that you should be asking yourself. What is it that would be interesting, inspiring, and entertaining to attract the people that we're looking for? Because you can't put out dead, boring, useless content. It's got to be really great content. So here's a really good example. This is Lion Brand Yarn. And they have been producing magazines online. They started by doing patterns, which was things that obviously people knit and crochet with their yarn. So people are going to be looking for patterns. Now, these were things that their clients had to pay for in the past. They were now providing them free. And then they went into different things. posting all kinds. This is from their most recent one. Here are 3 ornament patterns. They found somebody who does this little Lola cartoon, and they specifically hired Todd Clark to do things, to make Lola a knitter. And so now they have this little cartoon, and it gets a tremendous amount of interest. And here are some of the results. This is from Ilana Rabinovich, who's their VP of Marketing. So these people opted in, and they started really taking interest and forming relationships with them. But they, as Rebecca was saying earlier, they've actually built up an audience that rivals other media companies. So when they want to announce something, they have a built-in audience, and it's their audience specifically. So when they opened their retail showplace in New York, they promoted it in their own media, and there were people standing in line when the doors opened. So, you know, that's, of course, they also put it out into the traditional media, but it's really great to have your own media. This was one that was done in the UK, and it was Toyota when they did a branded content campaign about the Prius, and there's the YouTube is there. But this was seen by 4 million adults. It was a really cute program. They got one of the best UK comedians to do a program shot entirely in the car with other comedians and just talking about different things and about the car. And but the whole thing was quite light and funny and all about the car and in the car all the time. The awareness of the brand increased by 54%, and this is amazing. That consideration of the Prius when purchasing a vehicle jumped from 5th to 1st position. Now, that's a fantastic ROI. So once you've got all this content and you've got your images and your videos and you've figured out how to package it and be a resource and you're doing brand journalism, what are you going to do with it all? You have to get it out there, and it's got to be some way better than just putting it on the wire service. There's so much more that you can do with your content. From your research, Rebecca, what ideas would you have about how would you build up to get your own audience to be able to distribute it beyond just the media?
Well, you have to make content shareable, and one way to do that, of course, are with social media buttons that encourage tweeting and Facebooking and pinning and all of the other usual social networking suspects. And another way to do this that, Sally, you and I have discussed in some depth is creating a social media newsroom, because the press or the media section of a website is no longer directed at traditional print and broadcast media. It's really about making content findable and shareable by all of your target constituencies. And your target constituencies are very much influencers and press and the public, as much as they are, again, real, in quotation marks, media or journalists.
Sure. So with journalists, of course, you can make a media list. And here are some of the things you can use. Muckrack, if you're not familiar with it, muckrack.com is a way to find out where different journalists and bloggers are on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. And then there's a site called Journalist Tweets. So you can follow them, you can read their work, start commenting on their blogs, and just start the relationship. And the same goes with the bloggers. You can also find them in different places. There are all kinds of different tools that you can use to engage with them. But the biggest thing that journalists and bloggers still complain about is that you haven't read what I do, you don't know my beat, you're sending me stuff that's irrelevant, and you're just wasting my time. And the other one, apart from the bloggers and the journalists, is that you do have to find people that are relevant to your space. They may not be bloggers, they may not be journalists. They may just be other people in your industry that have a big following. They are thought leaders. They're not necessarily media people, but they might have a very big audience, and one blog post from them or one retweet from them could be incredibly valuable to you. So another thing that you really should be doing is having your content in feeds. Content is running around in the social web in feeds, so make sure that your content and your news is available in feeds as well. Don't forget the idea of paid syndication. There are a lot of different tools that can do that for you. So here's just one example, and this particular one is called BrandPoint, and they will syndicate your content onto other media sites. So it goes to newspaper websites, radio websites, and so on. And this one is called Outbrain. And I'm sure you've seen this on many media websites. At the bottom of an article it says, you might also like, and then it gives you, like here, there are 4 different options that would be related to what you've just been reading. And you'll see that one of them says paid distribution. And this, in fact, is from the Open Forum from American Express. So they are paying to have their articles syndicated through Outbrain. And so we get into this creative and social newsroom, which Rebecca was just mentioning. And I saw this just recently. This was a post from Edelman Digital on why companies need to produce content and why they need to have this kind of newsroom. So you have editors, you have your creative producers, community managers, and everything should be feeding into your newsroom. And that was his quote. If your company doesn't have the above model in place a year from now, you may regret it. So you need to really take a good look at your newsroom and see what kind of services, what kind of tools, what kind of things does it have available. Are you really servicing the media? So here's a checklist. It needs to be, you need a content management system, because it just is not a good idea in this fast-paced, as Rebecca was saying, there is no deadline, but the deadline is now. And so we have this 24/7 news cycle to have to go cap in hand to the webmaster or your IT department and say, I need this press release to go up on the website. You have to understand that IT and PR and marketing have 2 completely different agendas. It's not that they don't particularly want to do your press releases, but they have a million other things that they're doing that, from their viewpoint, takes priority. I was just working with a company that's just starting to put up a social newsroom, and one of the reasons was for the content management system, because they're 3 months backlogged on posting their press releases on their own website, which is just craziness. Also, you get a custom URL, so it'll say news.yourcompany.com. It looks just like, it should look like your own site. And you should be able to categorize all your press releases by content or by topic, because when a journalist or a blogger comes to your newsroom, they don't want to have to search through 1,000 press releases. If you have different products or different areas of interest, you should be categorizing your news that way. Feeds we mentioned, and they should be easy to subscribe to, 1 click, and still allow them to subscribe to your feeds by email. Maybe they still prefer that. Maybe they're not using RSS feeds. And be sure that your logo displays in the content, the feed that goes through the content, so the person receiving it knows where it's coming from. You should be able to post your news either in traditional format or in the social media release format, which puts it into different categories: core news, facts, research, background, quotes, tags, etc. Must have the images, must have the videos, and they must all have the embed codes. You should automatically be able to add your multimedia content once it's in the gallery. So once you're adding your press release in, there should be a little field that allows you to say, I want to add an image, and then it should give you all the images that are in your multimedia gallery. You just pick the one you want, and instantly it's in your press release. And it should be able to add Word documents, PDFs, slide decks, infographics, whatever you want to do. You should have your press contacts front and center, easy to see. When we did our research on all the corporate newsrooms that we did a couple of months ago, it absolutely amazed me that there are still companies out there that, never mind in the newsroom, even on the press release itself, there is no contact. So you're sending out a press release saying, I'd love to have some media coverage, but please don't call me. And experts is something that the media has become very interested in again. And this year it's been one of the top sources of resource for them, as they're looking for experts. So you should have an expert database in your newsroom with bios, and preferably a little video so that we can see right away how they react, how, would they be a good interview subject. Sharing, as Rebecca was saying, you must have the ability to share. And it should be an easy one-click. If I click this little tweet sign, it should immediately know who I am. If I'm logged into my Twitter account, it should show me my Twitter account right away. It'll be pre-populated with the link that I'm trying to tweet about. And all I have to do is just click tweet. That's it. You should also be able to pull in your corporate blog. You should be able to display your Twitter feed. This is a one-stop shop. This is your news site. It's not a press release place anymore. This is a newsroom, and it should have all your content so that if the public comes, as Rebecca was saying, the public sees something in the news and you are mentioned as part of that news story, they're going to come to your newsroom and they're looking to see everything that you have. The journalists certainly are. They don't want to have to go searching. I wonder if they have a blog. I wonder if they have videos. Maybe I'll have to go to YouTube. No, they're not going to do that. And journalists have asked, please tag everything. That makes it easier for it to be properly indexed in search and easier to find in the search. A tag cloud like this also works as a search function, because you can click on any one of these tags and it will bring up all the press releases and other content that has been tagged with that keyword. And then, of course, you should have a custom search so that they can search your newsroom and other websites like your blog. Make sure you're connecting to all your other content, and you should be able to add yourself. You should be able to add any new social accounts that you get. The other thing that your newsroom really must have is a dark section for crisis. And in the Burson Marsteller Digital Crisis Preparedness Report, almost 60% of the companies that were polled said that they have experienced a crisis, and almost 80% of them said they expect to have another crisis within the next 18 months. So you should have a section ready that you can turn on just with a flick of a switch, so that if something does happen, you can handle it and you have your newsroom ready to do that. It should have a dashboard where you can operate everything, you can track everything. Your Google Analytics will be there to show you the results that you're getting, how many people are visiting, how long are they on the site. You should be able to track in the news your brand, some of your keywords, so you can see where your content is going. Google News, Yahoo News. And then in the social search, you can search Facebook or Twitter, or even in the board reader will search forums. And then if you see somebody mentioning you, you can actually put your own Twitter account in there and answer right away. So that kind of dashboard is something you should have so that you can keep track of what's going on with your newsroom. Now in the study, an actual study of corporate newsrooms, 500 newsrooms we looked at in the Fortune 100 and then down to 500 and then the 100 of the Inc. 500. As you can see, very few of them have this kind of a newsroom. But this is something that, as David Armano from Edelman said, if you don't have this model within a year, you're probably going to regret it. Anything you want to say about that from a journalist's point of view or companies you've spoken to, Rebecca?
I think you've been very thorough in this regard, Sally. I'm following this with great interest.
Oh, good. Thank you. So if your newsroom still looks like this, it's definitely time to make it look like that. And every time we show this kind of a newsroom to journalists, you can just see them kind of going, oh, that's such a pleasure. But your newsroom should look like a news site rather than just a list of text press releases and worse, PDF press releases. So if you'd like to get a hold of us or you have questions, if you have any questions, please, we'd be happy to hear from you. Let me just see if I can find this 1 second. You can put questions into your
into the control panel, I believe.
Go into the control panel. There's a little chat feature there. So if you have questions, if you want to just write them in, and we'd be more than happy to do that. And just, we've got like 5 or 6 minutes still left. I'd be really happy if anybody wants to ask a question. Ask Rebecca while she's here. I'm not getting any questions at the moment.
Well, obviously, we've covered absolutely everything.
But please do feel free, if you have anything that you think of later that you would like to ask us. I'm going to post the slide deck onto SlideShare, and you will all get an email from us telling you we've recorded it, and because I know that some people couldn't, who registered, couldn't attend today. So probably within the week, the recording and the slide deck will be available, and so you can go through it again at your leisure. And if you have questions, I'm sure, Rebecca, you won't mind if they ask you.
I would be delighted.
Yeah, I still don't have any questions. So we're going to end off at that point. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining us today. And a huge thank you to Rebecca for taking this time out of, I know, is her very busy schedule. So thanks for sharing with us, Rebecca.
It was absolutely my pleasure, Sally. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That's the end of the webinar. Goodbye. Bye, Rebecca.
Bye, Sally. Thank you again.